Homily for the 19th Sunday in Ordinary Time, Year A. Jesus walks on the water, one of his most famous miracles. Peter does too, but we'll get into that. This is one of a series of miracles recorded in the Gospel of Matthew. Jesus feeds 5,000, then he walks on the water that we read today. Then he actually feeds 4,000. And then the transfiguration that we talked about and read last Sunday. In fact, today's first reading helps to round out our understanding of the transfiguration. In the first reading, Elijah is on Mount Horeb, which is also known as Mount Sinai. Now that name should ring a bell, Mount Sinai, because that's where God appeared in great majesty, clouds and thunder, and gave the law to Moses, who then told the people Israel. This was the foundation of the Jewish religion. So here, Elijah is on that same mountain, and in fact, he's fleeing for his life. The Jewish religion, by the time of Elijah, had become corrupt, and under the influence especially of King Ahab at that time and his non-Jewish wife Jezebel, they had abandoned the covenant. And Jezebel wanted to kill Elijah because he publicly resisted that, publicly remained faithful to the Lord. So now Elijah's on that mountain, and it's not part of the reading, but the Lord will tell Elijah that he is to rebuild the covenant and the kingdom. There were actually 3 kingdoms at that time. He was to rebuild all 3 kingdoms and rebuild the covenant that Moses had originally received on that same mountain. So now, the transfiguration, we can see the significance of Moses and Elijah appearing with Jesus, because we had Moses, who originally received the covenant, and then Elijah, who restored it, and now Jesus, who is about to establish the new covenant, which supersedes the old covenant. So now we return to the gospel reading. It says that Jesus calls Peter to walk on the water with him, and Peter does for a little while. Then he becomes afraid and starts to sink. Now, fear is a normal response to danger. Yet, martyrs in the history of the church have overcome that fear and offered their lives to God. They were so filled with love for God that they offered him everything, even their lives, after the pattern of Jesus on the cross. Coincidentally, this past week, Wednesday, August 9th, was the memorial of Saint Teresa Benedicta of the Cross. She was born Edith Stein, a Jewish girl, became an atheist, was drawn to the truth and beauty of the Catholic Church, and ultimately became a Carmelite nun. And this was during World War II, so she actually ultimately gave her life in the Holocaust. Now, before she lost her life, she had said that she wanted to offer her life as a sacrifice for the conversion of her fellow Jews. And this is very much the sentiment of St. Paul in the second reading, where we can read his anguish over the Jews' lack of faithfulness and how he longed for their conversion. St. Teresa was the same way. When she was canonized by Pope St. John Paul II in 1998, he called her a martyr for love. Now, can you imagine how much love she had for God and for her people to want to offer her life that way? How often have we wanted to do something for God, but we haven't because of fear? maybe fear of ridicule, fear of becoming sick. Maybe we're called to do big things, but if we think we're called to abandon our lives and go off and do some great thing for God, well, if we're, say, the breadwinner for our family, or we have other responsibilities, then we're not being called to do that. God does not want us to abandon our responsibilities. More than likely, we're called to do small things. And we know when we're called, don't we? Think of Elijah's tiny whispering sound. If we pray, certainly we need to set a time of prayer each day aside, but we can pray throughout the day to be open to that whispering sound so that in a circumstance we can respond to it and not withdraw because of fear or some other reason. I know a man who would approach a situation and say, Lord, I make myself available to you. 1 John 4:18 says, perfect love casts out fear. Perfect love casts out fear. As we grow closer and closer to Jesus, closer to a perfection of love for him, we too can leave our fears behind and have our moments of faithfulness. We may not be called to big things, but we are called to some things. And when we do those things, Jesus is pleased with us.